Hello again. I'm Ben Baer. I'm a fellow with the Ayn Rand Institute, and here again with me is Greg Salmieri.
Hello.
In a previous video, I introduced you to the concept of the Atlas Project, which is going to be a weekly chapter by chapter discussion group about Atlas Shrugged. Greg and I have read this book many times before, but we certainly hope that we're going to be having a number of people in the group who are reading it for the first time. And so I think it's worth thinking about what it's like to read it for the first time. Greg, you want to say a little bit about what it was like for you to read this book with fresh eyes for the first time?
I
And when
guess
did you do that, and what were the circumstances?
I guess I had two first times. The very first time I read it, I didn't finish it. When I was pretty young, in seventh grade, I went through a period of being really interested in politics, and I was reading a lot of different books about political philosophy. I read the Communist Manifesto then. I read some of John Locke then. And I had been coming to kind of very free market, small government sort of ideas. And a family friend who was one of these types of people who jumped from ideology to ideology and had been interested in Ayn Rand once when he was younger, said, "You sound a bit like Ayn Rand," and he gave me a copy of Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, her book on political philosophy. And I read that and at the time and really loved it and learned a lot from it. And I knew that Atlas Shrugged was her magnum opus and that it was a novel. And I had some idea of what it was about that included some spoilers, I'm afraid. And so I started reading that, and it just, I got a chapter or two in. In the second chapter, it seemed to me about some guy who was having trouble with his family, and it wasn't the political treatise I was expecting, or the political novel I was expecting. And it was difficult, and it had to do with romance and family conflicts and things that I weren't live to me personally yet. And so I lost interest, and I didn't read it at the time any further, although Ayn Rand remained in my mind as someone who I'd really like to views on politics and who opened me up to some new ways of thinking. And then when I was in college, I read it again. I encountered a professor, Alan Godhelf, who later he and I worked a lot together, who had been a friend of Ayn Rand's actually, and was a real expert in her ideas. And as part of a class, we read The Fountainhead, and after that, I just got totally captivated by her fiction as well as her philosophy. The Fountainhead was a real milestone in my life reading it, and I went on to read Atlas immediately after that. This was right after my freshman year of college, and it was, in a certain way, it felt like coming home or coming into a world that I always felt existed in some way, but didn't see enough signs of in the world around me. And in particular, I felt this tremendous sense of the characters, especially Dagny Taggart, being like full-fledged or real people in a way that most of the people I encountered, none of the people I really encountered in literature up until that point seemed to me to be, and very few of the people I met in real life or read biographies about seemed to me. They seemed fuller and richer and more like what I thought human beings could and should be, and I felt I related to these characters and to their problems in ways that was new to me to experience that as powerfully with a work of fiction. What about you? What was your first time?
And so, like you, I also first read The Fountainhead, and I did that in high school. And the interesting thing in my case, I think, was I went into it not expecting to like it at all, and even sort of under protest, I was in complete disagreement with Ayn Rand's philosophy on just about every front. I was reading it because there was this essay contest that you could enter and win money for a prize-winning essay, and I thought I could write a critical essay about the book. Turns out I never ended up actually writing the essay or entering because I didn't have time, but I was still hooked on the book and captivated by it in spite of myself. I'd also been reading a lot of other philosophy, and at the time, both moral and political philosophy. But this was the first both philosophical work and also, I think, novel that I was ever just engrossed by. And when I finished The Fountainhead, I still don't think that I thought of myself as in full agreement with Rand's philosophy, but I was certainly interested enough to start exploring it. And so I started reading a lot of her nonfiction the summer after I graduated from high school. And then once I was a freshman in college, I even got to the point of reading, I think, Dr. Leonard Peikoff's book, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, which is sort of a systematic overview of her philosophy, which unfortunately contains a number of spoilers about Atlas Shrugged in it. So I don't recommend reading that first if anybody has not yet read Atlas. But very soon after that, read Atlas while I was a freshman in college. And by this time, I was no longer reading it with my guard up. I was already very sympathetic to Rand, and really was just trying to immerse myself in this kind of alternate world that she created, experiencing the pleasure of doing that. It took me a long time, though. I think I must have started sometime in the fall, maybe November or December, finished at the end of my freshman year, like June. I still have the very first copy of it that I read, which is dog-eared and annotated and falling apart. But still an unforgettable experience.
To take that long to read it. This might just be a character difference between us, but when I get into a book, particularly if it's a novel, and this definitely happened to me with Atlas Shrugged, all I want to do is read it, and I have to hold myself back from avoiding all my other commitments to read it. But when, in the case of Atlas, it was the summer. I think I had a job that summer, but maybe it didn't start for a week or so until after I got out of school, and I pretty much read it as a full-time thing all day and night. I was just so wanted to be in this world and understand what happened to these characters. And that's not the only novel. Novels by other authors and others of Ayn Rand's novels I got similarly into, but I couldn't imagine just reading it slowly over the course of a year. The suspense would have done me in.
Well, I had already, maybe it was the spoilers, so I didn't have as much suspense, which is all the more reason there's going to be a no spoilers rule enforced in this.
That's true, but I had some spoilers too. I mean, I knew the couple of sentence version of what happens, which sentence I will avoid saying. But I knew the big thing that's supposed to be a spoiler. But there's still the question of what decisions in each of these situations will each of these characters make with it. Watching them grow and seeing how they do it. There's a million small but difficult, but small by the scale of the novel, situations people get into, and you want to see how they're going to get out of them. It's just a page turner. It turns out we've both read The Fountainhead first. I think it's fine to read whichever novel first interests you most. But I think it's a common path that people read The Fountainhead before Atlas Shrugged. It was published first. It's shorter. And I think maybe a lot of the people who will be coming to this project will be people who read The Fountainhead in high school. It's often taught in high school. There's this essay contest that the Ayn Rand Institute runs, and I expect we'll try to promote this project to people who've been in that essay contest. So it might be worth you and I saying a bit about how Atlas is like and unlike The Fountainhead, if there's anything someone who's read and liked The Fountainhead might want to know about Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, maybe so. So, I mean, just from my own perspective, The Fountainhead is in a way more realistic. It's set in a definite historical period, and the characters are larger than life, but the events of the novel aren't, in a way that they are in Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged has this fantasy element, which I think the author herself would have admitted would have been impossible. Not just the technology of the story, but even the events by her own admission, from a certain perspective, would have been impossible. Which is part of what makes it kind of like an alternate reality. I mean, not in the way that like reading Lord of the Rings is, because it is still supposed to be the United States. It's supposed to be set, 10 years in the future from whenever you're reading it or something like that. So it's not
written in it was written in 1957 or published in 1957. Right. So that future is now an alternative past for us.
An alternative past, right? Kind of like, I guess it would be sort of like watching Man in the High Castle is an alternate past.
Yeah, now that's written when it's the past from, that was written as an alternative history, whereas this was written as a take on how a future might go.
Right.
But now that future is an alternative history, and it's not, but it wasn't a future, I think, that she thought was literally possible in the details of it exactly as it happens in the novel. It's a universe in which certain facts about life are heightened and others sort of less focused on in order to make room for this heightened reality of certain aspects of life and of society. And it's also I don't want to call it exactly a political novel, because there's so much personal and deep about it, and that's not about which party should win or the factions of politics, or even just what the laws should be. But it's a societal scale novel in the way The Fountainhead isn't. So in The Fountainhead, Ellsworth Toohey is a public commentator, and there's kind of politics in the background of it. But it's a novel about one architect and the one woman who loves him and his other architects he's fighting with. And it's if you lived in the world of The Fountainhead, you could go live through the years in which that novel takes place and not know that the events described in that novel happened if you weren't following architecture. If you lived in the world of Atlas Shrugged, you wouldn't be able to avoid some of the events.
Right.
A novel about things that are happening on a scale of the whole society.
And this is one of the reasons why I said in the first video that this book is not only unlike any other book I know, but also unlike all of her previous books. If you look, for example, We the Living, which is more autobiographical, I mean, that's an existing genre, and the style in which it's written, I think, probably reflects the influence of her admiration for Victor Hugo. You look at The Fountainhead, again, kind of set in a historical time period. The style of it probably reflects her admiration for Sinclair Lewis. You look at the Atlas Shrugged, it's like nothing else. There's no other author that this looks like. She's created an entirely new kind of literary genre and style, and that's one of the best reasons, I think, for reading it.
Yeah, that was her own view of it. I mean, she said in an interview with some friends after in 1961 or 60, I think it was 61, that looking back on it, The Fountainhead feels a little bit too realistic, too naturalistic to her. It doesn't feel totally like her kind of universe. And Atlas Shrugged does feel to her, and I think totally like her kind of universe, and to readers like a new kind of universe that's distinctive of the person who wrote it. And I think you really feel like you're getting acquainted with a mind and a soul when you read this book. That's very unusual. That is Rand's mind and soul. And that was a really compelling experience to me. And I think it's a compelling experience to a lot of people, whatever you end up thinking about it. So in the case of my own case, and in the case of Ben, we are, think of ourselves as objectivist philosophers. We're people who really studied Rand's ideas and live by them and think of this as central to our lives. But there are a lot of people who disagree with her on significant points, who think of her as, even they fundamentally disagree with her. They think of themselves as on the other side of what they see as the major issues in life. But even some of those people experience it as a unique encounter with a unique mind.
I think, having said that, we're in a good position to wrap up this video. But if you're interested in having that unique encounter with a unique mind, please sign up to participate in the Atlas Project. Go to the Atlas Shrugged Facebook page, like that page. Join the Atlas Project Facebook group. That's at facebook.com/groups/Atlas Project. And join us for our first broadcast on September 2nd. Thanks, Greg.